Have you ever noticed how life has a strange way of flipping the script when you least expect it? The moment my son-in-law called me an outdated old man in front of the entire family, the laughter that echoed through the room felt like invisible knives. That night could have easily become the most bitter of my life. But just minutes later, silence took over, and everyone saw a truth they never imagined. And that's exactly why I'm here. Because what happened to me isn't just my story, it's also about you. It's about anyone who's ever been dismissed, humiliated, or treated like they no longer matter. And before I tell you how I turned humiliation into respect, I want to ask you one thing. Leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because every comment is living proof that dignity doesn't expire, and every subscription is a collective voice shouting, respect inside a family isn't a luxury, it's a right. I still remember the exact moment my son-in-law said those cutting words, outdated old man. It was like a dry snap in the middle of the room. It wasn't just a careless remark. It was a betrayal of the dignity I built over a lifetime. The room went silent for a second, and then the humiliation came. Not as words, but as laughter. It's strange how a group's laughter can sting more than a slap in the face. But the worst part wasn't what he said. It was the weight of the stares. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others let themselves laugh, like respect was just something you could toss aside with the wine glasses. Moments like that hit deeper than we expect, because they're not just about me or you. They're about everyone who's ever been dismissed when all they wanted was decency and recognition. That's when you understand just how cruel emotion can be. But here's the truth. When someone tries to cut you down in public, they're usually revealing more about themselves than about you. Anyone who needs to belittle others to feel important is chained to their own insecurity. I knew that. And even as I swallowed my anger, something inside me quietly burned. Not a blind thirst for revenge, but a need for liberation. A need to prove that dignity doesn't retire. Have you ever been underestimated, only for people to find out, too late, who you really are? That kind of humiliation leaves a mark, and it's only natural to long for a reversal. Life has a way of delivering those plot twists, often when you least expect them. And right then, I made a silent promise to myself. In a few minutes, everyone in that room would see who was really outdated. That's the point. Never let someone else define your worth. Show your truth through action, not argument. When we talk about respect, we're not talking about luxury, we're talking about a right. And the same goes for families. Respect and courtesy shouldn't be rare, they should be the rule. But too many people have learned to mistake age for a weakness and experience for irrelevance. Have you noticed how society sometimes treats wisdom like dead weight? Well, the story I'm about to tell you proves just how wrong that is. And if you, listening to me now, have ever been through something like this, whether at home, at work, or among so-called friends, then you know how much it hurts. But you also know how powerful the moment is when the tide turns. I lived through it, and it's that exact feeling that pushes me to share my story, because no one should be silenced. Respect is earned through action, not begged for. That's the difference between those who are humiliated and those who find liberation. Before I continue and tell you how my story flipped upside down just minutes after that insult, I'd like to ask something. Leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from, and subscribe to the channel. It's not just a click. Every comment is a voice rising up against the betrayal of silence. Every subscription is proof that together we show the world. Respect within a family isn't a luxury, it's a right. And when you take part, you become part of this turning point with me. It was a cold night in Denver, December 2022. Snow fell outside like a thick white carpet covering the streets, and the wind cut sharp like invisible blades. But inside that brightly lit banquet hall, the mood was something else entirely. Warm, perfumed with spice, fine wine, and slow-roasted meat. A family dinner that should have been memorable for the right reasons. Plates lined up like soldiers, crystal glasses chiming with every toast, a long, overflowing table offering more dishes than anyone could finish in one night. But behind all the luxury, there was something else, something unspoken. A tension that wasn't served on a plate, but floated in the air like invisible smoke. I sat at the head of the table, a seat that used to symbolize respect. At 67, I was Edward Harris, retired civil engineer to some, but to myself, still very much alive and capable. And yet that night, I carried a different weight. The way people looked at me was like they were looking at a faded painting, admiring the frame, but ignoring the details. I had built bridges, roads, schools, even the city hospital. I'd received medals, shaken mayor's hands, seen my face in opening ceremonies, but none of that seemed to matter at that table. My past was blurred by the smoke of the present. To some in that room, I was just an old man, someone who should sit quietly and listen, not speak. Next to me sat Ethan, my son-in-law, 32, marketing consultant, the kind who talks about data like it's poetry, confidence verging on arrogance. You know the type, people who walk into a room and act like they own it. That was Ethan. Smooth smile, perfect posture, always speaking with just a touch of venom hiding behind polite words. He knew how to win a crowd, and sadly, that night, he planned to use that charm against me. Across from him sat my daughter, Melissa. Melissa. When I looked at her, I still saw the little girl who once held my hand to cross the street, but her eyes told a different story now. Torn between her husband and her father, caught between loyalty to her marriage and the blood that ran through her veins. Her face was tight with tension, like someone forced to pick a side in a war they never wanted. I saw it in the smallest gestures, adjusting her napkin nervously, avoiding my eyes, laughing at Ethan's jokes without meaning it. The whole hall felt like a stage. There were guests watching, neighbors, some of Ethan's younger colleagues, family friends who weren't all that close, and each one played a role. The loud laughers, the silent watchers, the ones pretending to care more about the wine than the conversation. It was theater disguised as a family dinner, and with each passing minute, I could feel it. I was the character they'd already written off. In that refined environment, the faux contrast was almost cruel. French wine glasses passed from hand to hand, but my legacy felt like it had lost its flavor. The conversations were all about tech, startups, social media. When I talked about my bridges, structures that had withstood floods, or the schools still welcoming kids every morning, it was like my words evaporated. Have you ever been present and yet completely invisible? That's how I felt every time someone laughed, pretending I was part of a past that no longer mattered. And still, I held on to something. My old leather briefcase. Resting quietly beside my chair, it was more than just an object. That briefcase had been with me in meetings that changed lives, in contract negotiations worth millions, in city halls with engineers and mayors who respected my work. The scratches, the worn leather, they were scars that told my story. To me, that briefcase was a symbol of dignity, a reminder that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, but it was also a silent weapon, ready for the exact moment I would need to use it. While Ethan spoke loudly about his startup, showing off charts on his iPad to impress the guests, I watched. I watched every detail, the easy laughter of his friends, the neighbors' curiosity, Melissa's quiet attempts to keep the peace. I knew I wasn't being judged for the life I had built, but for the age I carried on my back, and that realization lit a quiet fire inside me. The stage was set, the first act had begun, but no one had the slightest idea that, before the night was over, the roles would reverse, and the story would take a turn no one saw coming. I was never just an engineer. That word, though important, never captured the full scope of my life. I built more than concrete structures. I built dreams, bridges that united communities, schools where kids found not only education but hope, hospitals that saved lives. Every project carried the mark of my dedication. Every stone I laid carried the emotion of knowing I wasn't just working for money. I was building a legacy. Today, when I walk down certain streets in Denver, I see buildings still standing tall, silent witnesses that the dignity of my work has outlived time. I remember the first medal I received from City Hall. I was nearly 50 when they called my name at the auditorium. I stepped onto the stage and heard applause that echoed deeper than any title ever could. I held that small award in my hands like a living testament that daily effort, silent dedication, and respect for your craft never go unnoticed. That medal is still with me, tucked inside the same leather briefcase I carry to this day. My journey wasn't just made of public accomplishments. It was built on private battles. There were nights I worked until dawn, reviewing calculations, fixing last-minute errors to avoid disaster. There were weeks I barely saw my daughter grow because I was out on construction sites in the middle of nowhere. But every sacrifice was anchored in a deep certainty. I was building something that mattered. And it's strange. The same effort that pulled me away from my family at times was the very thing that gave them stability, respect, and opportunity. That contradiction, I've always carried it in my chest. That old leather briefcase, with me since I was young, is the best summary of my life. It's been to ribbon-cutting ceremonies and tense negotiations where I had to convince mayors and investors that my projects were worth believing in. It's worn down now, scratched, cracked, beyond restoration. But those marks are my scars. And just like me, the briefcase has endured. A reminder that what's real doesn't deteriorate. It gains layers of history. While Ethan flashed his shiny iPad, I knew my briefcase carried something no screen ever could. Substance. Even after all I've achieved, I can see how younger people, sometimes even my own family, treat me like I'm no longer relevant. Like age is a sentence of, invisibility. Have you felt that too? Society has a way of praising temporary victories while forgetting the shoulders they were built on. How many of us have seen a forgotten teacher, a loyal worker replaced without a second thought, a father or grandfather labeled as dead weight? Being pushed aside doesn't erase your history, but it wounds the heart. Sure, I could list numbers, contracts, multi-million-dollar projects I signed off on, over 50 developments I was directly involved in. But, deep down, none of that means more than the look in a child's eyes walking into a school I helped build. That's the kind of emotion no startup can replicate, no matter how colorful the graphs. The dignity of real work isn't measured in likes or stock shares. It's measured in what still stands, long after memories fade. That's why, every time someone tries to diminish me, I remember what I've built. And I'm not just talking about concrete and steel. I'm talking about respect, about human. Bridges, about lives changed. That memory shields me from insults. It gives me the strength not to strike back right away. But don't be fooled. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, silence is just the setup for the reversal. And that night in Denver, while Ethan basked in his arrogance, I could feel it. The moment was coming. The moment to show, without raising my voice or giving a speech, that past and present can meet in a way that silences any humiliation. The night carried on like a carefully rehearsed performance. Restrained laughter, clinking glasses, conversations about travel, business, and the latest trends in tech, until, at one point, Ethan took the spotlight. He grabbed his shiny iPad, which he carried like a trophy, and launched into his latest achievement. The startup he claimed would revolutionize marketing in America. The screen cast a blue glow across the guests' faces, hypnotizing them with moving charts, animations, and numbers. It was like everyone forgot that at that very table sat stories far bigger than anything a smartphone app could tell. I stayed quiet, observing. His excitement was real, but so was something else. A need to assert superiority. Every word he spoke was laced with self-promotion. Then he dropped this line. Anyone who doesn't understand tech these days is basically dead weight. He lifted his iPad like a scepter. The phrase hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable. Some guests laughed nervously. Others mumbled in agreement. I felt a tightness in my chest, not for myself, but for what I saw happening right in front of me. Education and respect being trampled by arrogance at a family table. Then came the final blow. Ethan turned toward me, leaned forward slightly, and with that half smile he always wore, he said, "Outdated old man, that's what you are." Those words cut deeper than any insult I had ever received. It wasn't just a comment, it was a public betrayal, a humiliation, in front of everyone. The entire room held its breath. Then came the awkward, muffled laughter, like shards of glass falling to the floor. I saw knowing glances, guests trying to pretend it hadn't happened, but the damage was done. Melissa, my daughter, froze. Her eyes searched mine, apologizing without words. But the truth is, in that moment, she was just as trapped by the shame of having a husband who mistook cruelty for confidence, trapped by the fear that defending me would make her the next target. As her father, I understood that silence. It wasn't betrayal, it was helplessness. And somehow, that hurt almost as much as the insult. In that moment, I could have reacted. I could have slammed my hand on the table, raised my voice, recited my resume, listed my projects, contracts, awards. But I didn't. Sometimes, silence is the most powerful form of resistance. It disturbs, it reveals, it prepares. While Ethan laughed, and others laughed along, I chose to stay quiet. Not out of cowardice, but because I knew something they didn't. There's a right time for every answer, and that moment hadn't arrived. Not yet. It's strange how memory and emotion blend together in moments like that. As the word outdated echoed inside me, I remembered so many others who had been publicly disrespected. The retired teacher mocked for not knowing how to use a smartphone. The grandfather labeled useless for not understanding hashtags or memes. The veteran employee discarded by a young manager who believed experience was just a synonym for delay. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just my pain. I stood for everyone who'd ever had their dignity trampled by a generation that confuses speed with wisdom and forgets too easily. As Ethan continued flashing his charts and speaking like he'd already won something, I quietly reached for the old leather briefcase by my side. My fingers touched it like you'd touch a reserve tank, a hidden strength, an anchor. That briefcase held my story, my truth, my silent escape route. And I knew the turning point was coming. His arrogance, so loud, was about to be crushed by the quiet weight of what I carried in that case. That moment changed everything. The room was filled with voices, but somehow they all revolved around Ethan's. After calling me an outdated old man, he didn't stop. It was as if he had found a weak spot and was now pressing harder, hungrier. People like him feed on public laughter, as if someone else's humiliation fuels their vanity. And that night, surrounded by crystal glasses and polite smiles, my son-in-law seemed hell-bent on turning our family dinner into a stage for his ego. I tried to change the subject. I brought up the bridge I built over the Platte River, one of the most challenging projects of my career. I remember the rain, the sleepless nights, the equations redone by hand. But before I could finish, Ethan cut me off. That's the past, Edward. The world doesn't move on old stories anymore. People want innovation, apps, tech. If you don't keep up, you fall behind. You become dead weight. His words hit the table like a verdict. Some guests laughed on cue. Others looked away, uncomfortable. But everyone heard it. And with each interruption, his confidence grew. And it wasn't just about work anymore. You've done your part. You built stuff. You worked hard. But now's the time to enjoy retirement, travel, fish, play golf. I don't know. Tell stories to your grandkids and let people who understand the present take the wheel. His tone tried to mimic respect, but I knew better. It was a symbolic shove out of the way, a clear message. Step aside. The future doesn't have room for you. Some nodded along, as if he were speaking the absolute truth. And then came the jokes. A friend of Ethan's, loud enough for everyone to hear, chuckled and muttered, "A real dinosaur of engineering." Another joined in, laughing louder. "Careful, if you talk too loud, he might fossilize right there at the table." Laughter exploded, and me, sitting at the head of the table, I felt every laugh like invisible blades slicing through my dignity. These weren't just words, they were betrayal dressed as applause. Melissa, my daughter, tried to step in. "Ethan, please, that's enough." But he cut her off just as easily as he had cut me. "Babe, I'm not being cruel, I'm just being honest. Your dad knows it's true." Then he turned to me again, wearing that smug little smile. "Tell me, Edward, wouldn't it be more dignified to enjoy old age in peace than to keep competing with people who still have energy?" He used the word dignified like a weapon, never realizing he was the one trampling it. The room, once filled with a sophisticated air of celebration, had become an arena. I was the center of attention, not because of the respect I had earned, but because I was now the main act of a public humiliation. Every time I opened my mouth, Ethan would bulldoze over me with quick, sarcastic remarks. "Don't take it personally, Edward," he said at one point. "But people who don't understand the present just become a burden to the future." The room laughed again, and this time, even some who had stayed silent before joined in. It's incredible how people in a group can lose their sense of empathy. One by one, they started to reduce me to a joke. Grumpy old man, Stone Age engineer, Doc Brown from the wrong decade. The insults stacked up like stones being thrown at me. And still, I stayed quiet, because something inside whispered, "Don't waste your ammunition now." Some battles aren't won with shouting, they're won with timing and one single move. Inside, my mind went back to other moments like this. The retired teacher mocked for not knowing how to text. The loyal employee replaced by a kid who didn't know half as much. The grandfather dismissed because he didn't get the joke on some viral video. Our society has a bad habit. It confuses age with irrelevance. And that night, I had become the perfect target for this toxic mindset. It wasn't just a personal attack. It was a symbol, a pattern, a quiet betrayal of everyone who's grown older and been silenced because of it. Melissa, sitting beside me, was falling apart. She smiled awkwardly, trying to put out a fire with a glass of water, but her eyes betrayed her pain. I could see she wanted to scream, "Respect my father," but fear kept her frozen. And as her father, I couldn't blame her. Sometimes life throws our children into impossible dilemmas, and their silence isn't a choice, it's a prison. That added a whole new layer to my humiliation, realizing even my daughter's love was trapped in this nightmare. Fueled by wine, Ethan got louder. "The world's moving too fast for people stuck in the past." he said, raising his glass. If you don't get blockchain, crypto, AI, sorry, but you're outdated. The words were aimed at me, but the audience was the target. He wanted validation, applause, and he got it. The room echoed with nods, laughter, approval, as if he owned the future, and I was just an inconvenient shadow. But what they didn't know was this: shadows carry secrets. I kept my hand near the briefcase by my side. Its worn leather carried more truth than any glowing screen could ever offer. And while they mocked the dinosaur, I knew that briefcase would soon be the spark that would set fire to all that arrogance. I didn't need to speak, because in that moment, my silence was already a form of revenge. There are humiliations that crush us, and there are humiliations that make us stronger. That night, every laugh, every jab, every word of scorn piled up inside me like firewood. They thought they were burning me alive, but in truth, they were feeding the flames of my turning point. And once that fire lit, not a single one of them would be able to put it out. The room, still buzzing with laughter at my expense, would soon fall silent at what I was about to reveal. The moment had come to make my first move, the opening piece in a quiet game of revenge. There was no need to raise my voice, no need for insults or outrage, because revenge, when it's rooted in self-respect and emotion, doesn't require noise. It only needs symbols. That's when my fingers moved, almost unnoticed, toward the old leather briefcase by my chair. The same briefcase that had traveled with me for decades, worn, marked, but as steady as I was. While Ethan rambled on about future contracts, waving around colorful iPad charts no one really understood, I pulled the briefcase closer. The soft creak of the leather drew a few curious glances from nearby guests. I opened it slowly, like someone in no hurry, like someone who knows time is on their side. Inside, tucked between carefully organized folders and papers, was something simple, yet powerful. A key, a plain silver key. No ornament, no flair, just metal. I picked it up gently with my fingertips and placed it on the table, right in the eye center, between the crystal glasses and porcelain plates. The sound it made, a soft, metallic tap, was quiet, but it hit the room like thunder. A few guests furrowed their brows, confused. Melissa's eyes widened. She knew. Ethan, of course, couldn't resist. "What's this, Edward? The key to your old car? Maybe your Ford from the 80s? Or the basement where you keep your dusty medals?" The room burst into laughter again. But this time, something was different. The laughter wasn't quite as bold. Curiosity was creeping in. All eyes slowly turned to the little key resting alone on the white linen tablecloth. I said nothing, just reached out and gently spun it with my finger, as if playing with fate itself. The silence stretched, and with it, the power began to shift. Ethan's laugh grew louder, too loud, the kind of laugh that tries to hide unease. But the others, they were intrigued now. Funny how something so simple can carry more weight than any spectacle. To some, a key is just a key, but to me it was freedom, a concrete symbol, not of the past, but of a legacy still active, still present, still needed. While Ethan showed fleeting digital images that could vanish with a swipe, I placed something real on the table, something that couldn't be deleted, and that began to rattle people. Somewhere in the back I heard a whisper. "What does that key mean?" Still, I didn't speak. I let the silence do what haste never could, because preparation is about creating a void, one that can only be filled by the right reveal. People shifted in their chairs. Some whispered to each other. The table, once ruled by Ethan's jokes, was now held in suspense by a single quiet gesture. The weight of humiliation was beginning to fade, and in its place, a silent revenge settled in like a shadow. Melissa clutched her napkin tightly. I could see her fighting back emotion. She knew. Somehow she knew this gesture wasn't random. She was seeing her father again, not a man beaten down by ridicule, but one who carried dignity in every detail. And in her eyes, I saw something close to relief, almost like she was saying, "Show them, Dad." But I wasn't ready to show them, not yet, because timing, like in engineering, has to be precise. The right moment, the right force, the right pressure. Ethan, growing impatient, tried to take control again. "Look at this, folks. Edward brought a relic to dinner. Probably the key to the garage where he keeps his war trophies." He laughed. Again, louder this time, but the laughter didn't follow. People weren't laughing with him anymore. They were watching me, and the key, it hadn't moved, but it had become the centerpiece of the entire table. Everyone knew, even if they didn't understand it yet, that key meant something, and whatever it meant was going to change the night. Inside, I smiled, quietly, because I knew. Every second of doubt was a brick in the foundation of my comeback. Ethan thought he was laughing at me, but he was actually laughing in the face of his own downfall. I didn't have to say a word. The key was speaking for me. It was the first sign that the story was about to flip, and when it did, no laugh would be loud enough to cover the sound of the truth. The room still hung heavy with tension. The key sat on the white tablecloth like an unsolvable riddle. Some guests chuckled nervously, clinging to their sarcasm, but it rang hollow. Others sat in silence, eyes fixed on me, sensing something bigger was coming. Ethan naturally couldn't handle the quiet. He went for another cheap shot. "So what is it, Edward? You gonna give us all a ride in your old car? Maybe take us for a nostalgic spin in a 70s Cadillac?" The room laughed again, but this time the sound died fast. It choked off in their throats. That's when I looked up, calm, collected, and spoke for the first time since placing the key on the table. "If you want to know, look out the window." The request sounded simple, but the way the room froze was almost supernatural. One by one, heads turned toward the heavy curtains that covered the tall windows. Ethan followed the motion, still grinning, likely expecting something trivial, but when the curtain was drawn back, every jaw dropped. There, parked just outside, beneath a gentle snowfall, was a sleek, black limousine, gleaming under soft floodlights. But it wasn't just the car. Emblazoned on the side in gold lettering, Harris Constructions, my name, my company, still active, still thriving. The logo, well known in Denver and far beyond, sparkled like a badge of credibility. The impact was instant. I saw jaws drop. I saw expressions shift. The laughter vanished. Ethan tried to recover, coughing awkwardly. "It's just a car. So what?" But his voice had lost its edge. And I, still calm, added, "Inside that limousine are signed contracts. Active projects worth over $12 million. Schools, hospitals, bridges. This city still needs me, whether some of you here have convinced yourselves otherwise or not." The words landed like hammers on the table. There was a collective gasp, followed by stunned glances, some even ashamed. One guest, who had laughed just moments earlier at the dinosaur joke, now murmured, "12 million?" Another added, clearly impressed, "So, he's still in the game, and in style." The balance had shifted. The spotlight, once owned by Ethan, was now entirely on me. Melissa brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes full of tears. She hadn't known everything. I had kept many of my deals quiet, not out of secrecy, but because I never needed to show off. And now, in that moment, I wasn't just the humiliated father. I was the man who still stood tall, active, respected, a man who never stopped owning his story. I saw pride return to her eyes, and that gave me more strength than any multi-million-dollar deal ever could. Ethan, cornered, tried to strike back. 12 million, but from what decade? Those must be old contracts, right? His voice rang hollow. There was no laughter, no applause, no audience. Everyone's eyes were on me. Some even leaned forward in their chairs, as if inching closer. A neighbor said aloud, "Edward, I remember when you opened that school downtown. It's still a model today." Another chimed in, "I work at the hospital you helped build. Without you, it wouldn't be standing." That was the moment I understood the true power of respect. It can't be begged for. It can't be demanded. It's earned through truth. And the truth was right there, staring them in the face, parked outside the window, etched in gold lettering on a limousine, sealed inside contracts I still sign, and alive in the buildings that stand strong after decades. This wasn't about money. It was about legacy, about dignity, about proving that age doesn't make someone irrelevant. It makes them the foundation for everything still to come. I turned and looked Ethan in the eye. His smile was gone. His face, flushed with shame, the image of a man who had just been exposed. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to humiliate him. The scene spoke for itself. The revenge was complete, not with hatred, but with justice. And oddly, I felt a trace of compassion, because I saw it clearly now. His emptiness was so deep, he had to diminish others just to feel big. But now, in front of truth, he had nowhere left to hide. As silence settled across the room, I leaned back slightly, touched the key still, resting on the table, and said calmly, "It's not to an old car, Ethan. It's to the future. Mine, this city's, my family's." No one laughed. No one dared to. The entire room sat frozen, as if they'd just witnessed the final scene of a movie, a plot twist that changed everything. And for the first time that night, I took a deep breath, with the peace of someone who knew. The confrontation had happened, and it ended exactly how it needed to. The silence that followed the limousine's reveal was, thick, almost touchable. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The laughter was gone. Even the sound of silverware against plates seemed to vanish under the weight in the air. I could feel every eye on me, some curious, others ashamed. Some couldn't meet my gaze, aware now of how easily they had played along with Ethan's cruelty. Others stared directly at me, trying to reconcile the man they had mocked with the man now sitting before them, a man who'd just reclaimed the room without saying more than a few quiet words. Ethan, still flushed, tried to gather himself. I could see his lips moving, searching for a way out, a phrase, a quip, something to take back control. 12 million, he repeated weakly. But that doesn't really mean anything if... He stopped. His voice cracked. His throat closed, as if even the words had abandoned him. He who had once spoken with such certainty now sat there, exposed, fragile, and speechless. That's when I decided to speak. No shouting, no grandstanding, just calm, steady, deliberate. I looked him directly in the eyes, unhurried, letting every second of silence settle heavily on his shoulders. The entire room held its breath. Then I said the words I had been holding in. Outdated isn't the one with a past. Outdated is the one who needs to tear others down, just to feel tall. The phrase sliced through the room like a blade. There was no comeback, no laughter, just silence. A silence not just of shame, but of recognition. It was like everyone in that room had been hit with an invisible truth, a truth that needed no further explanation. Ethan, who had always relied on others to laugh with him, was now alone and unheard. I saw something shift in the guests' eyes, as if the spell had been broken. The ones who had laughed at me earlier now looked away, embarrassed. Others nodded softly, acknowledging the truth they'd just witnessed. The room that once rang with mockery was now filled with a different kind of respect, not loud or showy, but quiet, deep, unshakable. Melissa couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Her fingers clutched the napkin so tight her knuckles turned white. She looked at me like she had rediscovered something lost, the father who had never stopped being strong, the man who didn't need to shout to be heard, the example of dignity in its purest form. She nodded at me, silently, as if to say, that's what I needed. That's what we all needed to see. Ethan, on the other hand, sank into his chair. His proud posture collapsed. His chin, once raised, now hung low. His hands, once so animated, lay still on the table. He looked smaller now, shrinking inside his expensive suit. For the first time that night, I saw him without the armor. Just a man, made small by the greatness he had tried to mock. And that contrast didn't need to be explained. Everyone could see it, but I knew. That final sentence wasn't just for him. It was for every person in that room, for every guest who had laughed at the wrong moment, for anyone who's ever disrespected or been disrespected for their age, their wisdom, their silence, and for those listening to me now, wherever they are, because the truth is universal. Dignity doesn't expire, and respect is not negotiable. That sentence wasn't just a reply to an insult. It was a statement, a declaration, a manifesto. And when I leaned back in my chair, still holding Ethan's gaze, I knew I didn't have to say another word. The turning point had happened. The man who had been mocked minutes earlier now stood taller, freer, stronger than ever. Humiliation had become liberation. Betrayal had given way to the most elegant form of revenge, the kind carried out in silence, with nothing but the strength of truth. And that strength, no one can erase it. The silence that followed my words seemed endless. It was as if time itself had stopped. I could hear the snow tapping against the windows outside, as if even nature had paused to listen. Within seconds, the mood in the room shifted. The same eyes that had just looked at me like I was a relic now reflected something else. Respect. It wasn't just surprise. It was quiet admiration, a kind of recognition I never had to ask for. The first to break the silence was one of the guests who had earlier made the fossil joke. He cleared his throat, visibly embarrassed, and said, "Edward, I remember the opening of Jefferson School. My niece studied there. She still talks about the library. You changed a lot of lives." Others nodded. Another guest, a doctor, raised his glass and added, "I work at the hospital you helped build. If it weren't for your work, hundreds of patients wouldn't have received care." The words spread around the table, and suddenly, what had been laughter at my expense became a chain of acknowledgments. Melissa, who had been silent the whole time, couldn't hold back her tears. She stood up, walked around the table, and came to me, placing her hands on my shoulders. She leaned in and said with a trembling voice, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I should have defended you from the beginning." Her tear-filled eyes told the story of someone torn, but also someone finally free to recognize who I really was. I embraced her without saying a word, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words, only a gesture. Ethan, on the other hand, looked like he was sinking into his seat. Flushed red, unable to meet anyone's gaze, he tried to explain, I was just joking. I didn't mean, you know how it is. But no one backed him up. The same crowd that had laughed at his jokes now looked at him with disdain. The room that had once echoed with his voice now answered him with silence. And that silence was sharper than any rebuke. He tried once more. Edward, I didn't mean to offend you. It was just a way to… But his voice faltered. Some guests even chuckled, not at me, but at the pitiful sight of a man trying to rescue what little pride he had left. Right there in front of everyone, Ethan tasted the humiliation he had tried to serve me. The circle had closed. The man who had mocked me was now mocked in his own home. I stood up. I didn't slam the table. I didn't raise my voice. I simply adjusted my jacket and slipped the key back into my old leather briefcase. The gesture, so simple, felt like a period at the end of a long sentence. Melissa took my arm, as if she didn't want me to walk out alone. Several guests stood as well, a mix of respect and quiet regret. They offered handshakes and words they hadn't said earlier. You're not outdated, Edward. You're an inspiration. Thank you for everything you've done for Denver. It was an honor to sit at this table with you. As I walked toward the exit, I could feel the shift in the air. The same table that had felt like a courtroom of ridicule was now a stage of reverence. Every step I took was followed by approving eyes, as if each glance was trying to erase the sting of what had been said minutes before. And I knew nothing they said would undo what had already happened, but at least it would serve as a lesson. Ethan remained seated, defeated, paralyzed. His arrogance had been dismantled, piece by piece, in front of the very people who once applauded him. He was no longer the host, no longer the center of the evening. He was now just a small man, exposed by his own ego. And that was the greatest punishment of all, not to be torn down by me, but by the truth. I left with my head held high. The cold Denver air hit my face, and with it came a deep sense of liberation. The limousine was still parked out front, shining under the snow, proof that I was no relic of the past, but a living force in the present. I stepped inside with the serenity of someone who has nothing to prove, and as the door closed behind me, I knew I wasn't the one leaving humiliated. Ethan was, and more than that, so was everyone who had ever believed that dignity comes with an expiration date. The days that followed were nothing like I expected. That dinner, what started as the most humiliating moment of my recent life, became a turning point. Word of what happened spread fast, among neighbors, old friends, former colleagues. It was as if everyone wanted to talk about it, reflect on it, understand it. How someone labeled an outdated old man could turn the tables in front of a room full of witnesses in just a matter of minutes. And in a way, the story didn't belong just to me anymore. It now belonged to everyone who had ever been dismissed, but still found the strength to stand up again. I started receiving unexpected invitations. Local universities asked me to speak about engineering and about the value of experience. Radio and TV shows wanted my version of the story. Newspapers wrote articles, not just about my projects, but about the life lesson hidden in my journey. People I'd never met began stopping me in the street. One older gentleman said, "You spoke for me that night. My own family once called me deadweight, too." A young woman added, "My grandpa's going to hear your story. He needs to know he still matters." That's when I realized this wasn't just personal revenge. It was something much bigger. It was a collective liberation. The emotion I felt, seeing how many people saw their own story in mine, was indescribable. I had turned betrayal into inspiration, humiliation into respect, and my dignity into fuel for countless others. That's when I understood something. Whenever life pushes us aside, we always have two choices. We can accept the label they give us, or we can turn it into a ladder and climb. Melissa changed after that night. She started visiting me more often, and her words carried something they hadn't before: pride. One day she told me, "Dad, you didn't just teach me how to walk when I was little. You taught me not to bow my head when life tries to erase me." Those words meant more to me than any award I'd ever received, because they reminded me the most important legacy isn't in the bridges I built, it's in the lives I inspired, starting with my own daughter. As for Ethan, he stayed silent for a long time. He never apologized publicly. His pride wouldn't let him. But I know that night stayed with him. He learned something the hard way. Arrogance doesn't hold you up for long. And I, instead of holding on to bitterness, learned something even greater. The real revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about making them face their own smallness. That kind of reflection, quiet, unavoidable, and heavy. It's a weight only they can carry. The most beautiful part of all this was realizing how my story began to inspire people across generations. Young people, who once thought experience was a weakness, started coming to me for advice. Veteran professionals, who had long felt forgotten, began to stand tall again, with renewed courage. And in every talk I gave, I repeated the same line, because it wasn't just mine, it belonged to all of us. Respect has no age, dignity doesn't expire. And it's with that reflection that I want to speak directly to you, the one listening to me right now. How many times have they tried to silence your voice? How many times have you been called outdated, useless, irrelevant? Maybe you felt the same sting I felt that night in Denver, but I'm here to remind you, your story is not dead weight. Your story is foundation. It's bedrock, the very thing holding up the present for more people than you know. Don't let someone else's arrogance steal from you what no one can take away, the worth of your journey. Before we end, I want to invite you to do something. Leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. And if you've ever gone through something like I did, share your story. Your voice matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. And, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because every comment isn't just a few words, it's an act of resistance. Every subscription isn't just a number. It's a flag raised high that says, no one is too old to be heard. No one is too small to be respected. Together, we can turn stories of pain into stories of victory.